That's what you're in store for with Justin Trudeau. Trump wants our jobs. Trudeau wants to help him take them. Let's not get distracted. The problems we have in immigration.
Justin Trudeau arrived at the APEC summit with ambitions as grand as the event itself. Declaring Canada a global leader in clean energy and progressive policymaking, he sought to portray himself as a statesman of vision and influence. His opening remarks celebrated Canada's nuclear advancements, particularly its investments in small modular reactors, SMRs, positioning these as key to global decarbonization. However, the reality back home clashed with his lofty rhetoric as Canadians grappled with rising costs of living and growing discontent over his government's policies. The summit was an opportunity for Trudeau to assert Canada's role in the international arena, but his attempts were met with skepticism. While he highlighted Canada's recent deal with Romania to export nuclear technology, critics noted that such projects remain years away from bearing fruit. Back home, Canadians face soaring energy costs, and many questioned whether Trudeau's nuclear ambitions were grounded in practical solutions or merely a play for international acclaim. Trudeau also touted Canada's environmental leadership, pointing to the country's carbon tax as a model for other nations. He framed the tax as a necessary measure to combat climate change while encouraging innovation in green technologies. Yet, this narrative failed to resonate with many Canadians burdened by higher utility bills and increased costs for basic goods. The disconnect between his global aspirations and domestic realities became increasingly evident. At the heart of the criticism was Trudeau's handling of energy policy. While his government invested billions in renewable energy projects, critics argued that these initiatives often came at the expense of traditional energy sectors, particularly oil and gas. Provinces like Alberta, heavily reliant on energy exports, have seen significant job losses as a result of federal policies perceived as hostile to their industries. Trudeau's focus on green energy has alienated many workers who feel abandoned by his government. The Prime Minister used the summit to celebrate Canada's recent free trade agreement with Indonesia, describing it as a landmark achievement. He emphasized the potential for Canadian businesses to tap into Indonesia's growing economy. However, this announcement raised concerns among domestic stakeholders. Many feared that the deal, like previous trade agreements under Trudeau, would disproportionately benefit other nations while leaving Canadian industries vulnerable to competition. Canada's manufacturing and forestry sectors have been particularly affected by Trudeau's trade policies. Over the past decade, poorly negotiated agreements have undermined the competitiveness of these industries, resulting in factory closures and job losses. Workers in British Columbia and Ontario have voiced frustration with a government that appears more interested in securing international praise than protecting domestic jobs. Trudeau's leadership during Donald Trump's presidency was another focal point of his remarks. He claimed credit for maintaining Canada's economic stability during a tumultuous period, emphasizing his government's role in preserving jobs and trade relationships. Yet, his narrative glossed over the challenges faced by Canadian workers and industries during this time. Critics argued that his administration often failed to respond effectively to American protectionist policies. The softwood lumber dispute exemplifies Trudeau's shortcomings in trade negotiations. Despite promises to resolve the issue, tariffs have doubled under his leadership, impacting thousands of Canadian jobs. Comparisons to former Prime Minister Stephen Harper further highlight Trudeau's failings. Harper eliminated similar tariffs within 90 days, while Trudeau has spent nearly a decade with little progress. Trudeau's decision to attack opposition leader Pierre Poilievre during the summit was widely criticized. Instead of focusing on the summit's agenda, Trudeau accused Poilievre of neglecting intelligence briefings, a domestic issue unrelated to the event. This move not only detracted from the seriousness of the summit but also cast Trudeau as unprepared and overly partisan on the global stage. Poilievre, by contrast, has emerged as a formidable alternative to Trudeau. His criticism of the government's economic policies has resonated with many Canadians who feel left behind. In a recent interview, Poilievre pointed to the devastating impact of Trudeau's carbon tax, arguing that it disproportionately affects low- and middle-income families while doing little to address climate change. Under Trudeau's leadership, Canada's carbon tax has quadrupled, significantly raising the cost of living. This policy has been particularly hard on small and medium-sized businesses, which struggle to remain competitive under increasing regulatory and financial pressures. Many entrepreneurs have expressed frustration with a government that prioritizes climate rhetoric over economic pragmatism. Immigration policy has also become a contentious issue during Trudeau's tenure. Canada's population has grown by 300% in recent years, driven largely by immigration. However, the infrastructure needed to support this growth has not kept pace. Housing shortages, overwhelmed healthcare systems, and strained public services have created challenges for both newcomers and long-time residents. Trudeau has framed Canada's immigration policy as a model for inclusivity and diversity. Yet, critics argue that his government has failed to plan effectively for the pressures this growth has placed on the country's resources. The result is a growing sense of resentment among Canadians who feel their concerns are being ignored. Poilievre has proposed a more balanced approach to immigration, emphasizing the need for legal and orderly processes. He has called for stricter border controls and policies that prioritize economic integration. His stance has struck a chord with voters who see him as a leader willing to tackle difficult issues. The APEC summit also highlighted the widening gap between Trudeau's global ambitions and his domestic realities. While he sought to position Canada as a leader in clean energy and trade, the challenges facing ordinary Canadians painted a different picture. Rising housing costs, stagnant wages, and deteriorating public services have eroded public confidence in his leadership. Trudeau's focus on international acclaim has often come at the expense of addressing pressing domestic issues. For many Canadians, his promises of innovation and progress ring hollow when basic needs remain unmet. This disconnect has fueled growing support for Poilievre, who has positioned himself as a pragmatic alternative. Energy policy remains a central issue in the debate over Trudeau's leadership. His government's emphasis on renewables has been praised by environmentalists but criticized by those who depend on traditional energy sectors for their livelihoods. Poilievre has argued for a balanced approach that includes investments in clean energy without undermining the country's oil and gas industries. Housing affordability is another critical challenge under Trudeau's government. Rapid population growth, coupled with insufficient housing development, has driven up prices, making homeownership unattainable for many Canadians. Poilievre has proposed policies to increase housing supply and reduce costs, presenting a stark contrast to Trudeau's approach. As Trudeau's approval ratings decline, Poilievre's popularity continues to rise. Many Canadians are drawn to his message of economic resilience and energy independence. His proposals to scrap the carbon tax and prioritize domestic industries have resonated with voters seeking change. The APEC summit served as a microcosm of Trudeau's tenure, ambitious rhetoric overshadowed by a lack of tangible results. While he seeks validation on the global stage, Canadians are left to grapple with the consequences of his policies. Poilievre, on the other hand, offers a vision rooted in practicality and a commitment to addressing the nation's real challenges. With a federal election looming, the contrast between Trudeau and Poilievre has never been clearer. Trudeau represents the status quo, a government more focused on optics than outcomes. Poilievre, by contrast, promises a path forward, one that prioritizes economic growth, energy innovation, and the well-being of everyday Canadians. The choice before Canadians is stark. Will they continue to support a leader who prioritizes international acclaim over domestic progress, or will they embrace a new direction under Poilievre? The stakes are high, and the decision will shape Canada's future for years to come.